Good evening, everyone who is joining right now. We will be starting in a few moments. We have the option to listen to this webinar in Spanish. If you would like to listen in Spanish, you can, and you're logged in on a phone or computer, you can go down to the bottom of your screen and click the little symbol that looks like a globe, and you should have the option to choose Spanish. Good evening, everyone. We're just going to be waiting a couple of more minutes as folks sign on. We know sometimes Zoom can take a few minutes. So we will be starting shortly. And if you would like to listen to this webinar in Spanish, you can go to the bottom of your screen and click the globe icon and choose Spanish. Our interpreter Rosa is also on. I think she's muted right now, but she can also give the instructions in Spanish. All right, it is 5 past. We will get started now and know that some folks will be joining us. So first, I want to thank you all for being part of this series and our first session. We are working through some of the technology that will help to make this series more accessible, including Spanish interpretation. And so we hope that you will be patient with us if we have any technical difficulties. So welcome. This is the digital dialogue series, Co-Learning to Build a Good Food System. Again, if you would like to listen to the webinar in Spanish, please click the button at the bottom of your screen that looks like a globe and select Español. My name is Molly Riordan. I am the Good Food Purchasing Coordinator for the City of Philadelphia Department of Public Health's Division of Chronic Disease and Injury Prevention, a long name that is also known as Get Healthy Philly. At Get Healthy Philly, we believe that all people should live to their fullest potential in environments that allow them to grow and thrive, and that progress only happens when we treat all people with dignity, care, and respect. As part of its efforts, Get Healthy Philly works toward creating a healthy, sustainable, and fair local food system, or what we call a good food economy, and acknowledges that dismantling systems of oppression is foundational to our vision of a just food system. Tonight is the first of a series of 6 conversations with community and civic leaders whose work reimagines our food system in Philadelphia and in cities across the country to answer the question, what does it take to build a good food system for all, right now, at this point in time? These intercity digital dialogues showcase progress in developing a good food economy through anti-racist strategies and inspire all of us to envision and work toward an equitable food system. The series is in partnership with the Free Library of Philadelphia's Division of Cultural and Civic Engagement. I'd like to thank my co-organizer, Susanna Erminska, who is the exhibitions curator at the division. Susanna is managing technology tonight, so if you have any tech issues, you can contact her via the chat function, which is also available. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, you can, if you only see 3 dots, you can hit those dots and there should be a chat function right there. Funding for this series, like I said, comes from the Sodium Reduction in Communities program of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, from the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, and from the Free Library. This event was originally scheduled for an in-person event at the Heim Center for Civic and Cultural Engagement at the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is providing for the Spanish interpretation tonight and every night during this series. As I said, tonight's the first in our program, so thank you again if we have any technical difficulties as we iron out the kinks. And we're fortunate to be starting off this series with an exciting duo who will share with us how they're reimagining restaurants in post-pandemic cities. Devita Davison of FoodLab Detroit and Ben Miller of South Philly Barbacoa, El Compadre, and Masa Cooperativa. To set the stage for how we want to reimagine restaurants, I'd like to start with a quote from an interview given by the late civil rights leader and former US Representative, John Lewis. In a portion of the interview, he describes his first major actions as a civil rights activist, organizing and taking part in sit-ins at lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee. We took our seats in a very orderly, peaceful fashion. The students were dressed like they were on their way to church. They had their books. We stayed there at the lunch counter, preparing our homework because we were denied service. The manager ordered that the lunch counters be closed, but we just sit there. We sit there all day long. It continued for a few more days. It continued day in and day out. One Saturday, it was a beautiful day in Nashville. We had about 100 students prepared to go down. We got a call from a local white minister who had been a real supporter of the movement. He said that if we go down on this particular day, he understands that the police will stand to the side and let a group of white hoodlums and thugs beat people up, and then we would be arrested. And we should make a decision whether we want to go or not. We made a decision to go, and we all went to the same store in the heart of downtown Nashville, and we occupied every seat at the lunch counter, every seat in the restaurant. And it did happen. A group of young white men came in and started pulling and beating, primarily the young women, put lighted cigarettes down their backs and in their hair. And in a short time, police officials came in and placed us all under arrest. and not a single member of the white group, the people opposing our sitting down at the lunch counter, were arrested. We all left that store singing "We Shall Overcome." This was the first arrest in the Nashville sit-ins, the first mass arrest any place in the South. I believe it was February the 27th, 1960. So from 60 years ago, John Lewis shows us that lunch counters and restaurants are not just eating places. They're a locus of social change and a place to recognize our common humanity and demand that our common humanity be recognized. And I think our speakers tonight will have much to share on the power of these places where we gather together and eat. So with that, I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers. As the Executive Director of FoodLab Detroit, Devita Davison combines her passion for culinary arts with activism and social entrepreneurship. FoodLab is a membership-based nonprofit organization with a mission to cultivate a community of food entrepreneurs who aspire to use the power of business to solve some of Detroit's more challenging social and environmental problems. The nonprofit focuses on entrepreneurs and communities who have been traditionally under-resourced, aiming to build power and resilience for people around the city. Devita works with over 200 food entrepreneurs through the Food Lab's programming and technical assistance, and she connects them to the resources they need to launch, operate, and scale good food businesses that create good jobs and catalyze positive change in their communities. Devita writes on local food systems, and she has spoken and facilitated workshops on food justice, entrepreneurship, and the local food movement at TED, Just Food, Netroot Nation, the Omega Institute, and Valley. Ben Miller is the co-founder of South Philly Barbacoa, along with his spouse, Christina Martinez. A restaurateur, restaurant worker advocate, and immigrant rights activist, Ben co-founded South Philly Barbacoa in 2014 and went on to create several pop-ups and business ventures at the cross-section of restaurants and community organizing. He's the organizer and one of the worker owners of Masa Cooperativa, a worker-owned cooperative that localizes the corn tortilla supply chain while supporting wealth creation for undocumented worker owners. In response to the increased need for emergency meals during COVID-19, Ben worked with local organizers and national efforts to provide over 200 meals daily from their South Philadelphia restaurant kitchen to neighbors in need. Ben and Christina's activism and unparalleled food, including their original restaurant's namesake dish of slow-cooked lamb tacos, which, if you're tuning in from outside of Philadelphia, are the best breakfast in the city, has earned them accolades nationally, including on an episode of Chef's Table and as a 2016 Best New Restaurant in Bon Appetit magazine. Devita, welcome. Ben, welcome. I'm so thrilled that you're here.
Thanks, Molly.
Devita, I'd like to start with you. Can you please tell us briefly, not that it can be brief, what FoodLab Detroit is all about, what you were up to before mid-March, and what you've been up to since mid-March?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Molly. It's an honor, it's a thrill. I'm excited to be in conversation with Ben. Him and Christina, to me, are absolutely iconic in Philadelphia, and I admire and love them so much and all the work that they're doing. So thank you so much for thinking about me in this kickoff conversation. This is the very first one. So Ben and I are kind of setting the tone here. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah, just really quickly about FoodLab, and you did such a beautiful introduction. But beyond us being a nonprofit organization that supports entrepreneurs here in the city of Detroit, at the heart of what FoodLab is, it's a radical experiment that's rooted in food and community. And so the word Food Lab comes from the fact that it's a laboratory. It's a laboratory for training and supporting food entrepreneurs on how to build food business that is truly equitable and sustainable, and most importantly, community centered. So what were we doing pre the COVID crisis, and what will we continue to do? And so before our industry, and to be quite honest, before the Band-Aid had been ripped off our industry. And this Band-Aid has revealed an ugly underbelly. It has revealed the secrets that many of us who work in this industry have already known, but the public is now getting the opportunity to see. So what were we doing post-COVID? We were working with chefs and restaurateurs and cooks who were committed to starting and growing a good food economy because we were aware of the inequitable and the unsustainable way that our food system was growing. So over the past 5 years, we've been building what we call a food-based inclusive economy, right? Trying to create a new paradigm in the food system that centered our most vulnerable, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous people of color. And right before the pandemic hit, we had launched, not even knowing that we were going to be thrown in the midst of a global pandemic. We were right in the middle of launching our second annual, what we call Food Labs Fellowship for Change in Labor. And it's a radical idea that brings together a really small group of chefs and restaurateurs. We have a total of 10 fellows who are really committed on how they were going to use their business to bring about transformational change in the food system. So we believe at this time, it's movement building time. And what I mean by that is that we see people from all walks of life, like really excited about how they can be a part of change and how that happens. And we're just happy that we are now in conversation with a really intimate group of fellows who are heads down, who are really excited about bringing about that change and transformation.
I am excited to learn more about what that fellowship entails and when we're talking about transformational change, what we're talking about. So I'm going to ask you about that in a moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you high level, just to I know we're going to get into the nitty gritty.
Well, thank you, Devita. Ben, same question for you. What was happening up until mid-March in your ventures and what's been happening since?
Yeah, our restaurant South Philly Barbacoa was going well. I would say we're running our business and selling our food. My wife had opened up Casa Mexico, 2 doors up from Barbacoa back in February, and we had founded the Masa Cooperativa recently prior to that. The Masa Cooperativa was an idea that came from using the opportunity that undocumented people cannot legally work in a business, but can be a legal owner. So the idea started to shift of how can we create a cooperative where everyone's the owner.
Ben, can I interrupt you for just a second? Some folks are saying they're having a hard time hearing you. Are you able to bring your mic closer, speak a little louder?
Yeah. Is this better?
That's great. And we get a close-up of your face, which is excellent.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
I have a speaker in here too, so I can hear everything good, but I'm gonna turn that down so I don't get feedback. We'll try it. Okay, so you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's been so much going on since COVID that it's even hard to remember what was going on before COVID and what our life was like. But we were in our routines and we were in our restaurants. We have founded the Masa Cooperative, which is a way that the membership right now is 75% people that are undocumented. This is a way that we're using the loophole that you don't have to be a citizen to be a business owner, because it's a longer conversation that we could get into, but people in the cooperative are worker owners, so in this way they can be legally paid and legally work. So it's a way that we're producing masa for other immigrant-owned businesses, and we're trying to just improve the nutrition and the quality of the tortillas, and also just to respect and honor the ancestors that developed the nixtamalization process. And this came through kind of the development of our tortilla program at Barbacoa. the COVID hit, and we someone's saying they can still hardly hear. I don't know what. Okay, I'm just gonna have the phone a little closer to my face. When the COVID hit, we were fully supportive that, you know, restaurants be closed, as they can be a place where pathogens are spread, and our crew reduced down to, you know, my wife and I and our nephew, and we were, you know, beginning to do all of the preparation ourselves, but we never actually closed. We just shifted it completely with to go. And we started offering vegetarian packages during the week that people could pay what they can. A chef, Aziza Young, she contacted me, and she asked if she could use our kitchen to cook for 80 elderly, non-ambulatory, low-income people in Philadelphia, and we said, of course. She started bringing in a different chef with her every day and producing these meals. Then I hooked up with Jose Andres. We got some funding through World Central Kitchen, and we were able to expand that project to 200 meals a day. Then I hooked up with the 215 People's Alliance, which is a political organizing group that's doing movement building stuff. They were involved in Kendra Brooks' election and Larry Krasner's election, and now we're and other community partners. And now we're operating this space at El Compadre, which had been shuttered, as a way that we're having a collaborative of chefs and political organizers, and also we have a community garden that's feeding the restaurant. And this is a way that we're trying to connect with people, connect them with free food. We're also being able to pay the chefs in this kind of World Central Kitchen model. Our other restaurants are operational as well.
Thanks, Ben. So either of you can decide who wants to answer first, but I'm curious how the impact of COVID-19 has made you think differently about the restaurant industry, or if it has made you think differently about the restaurant industry, seeing what has happened to it over the past, what are we at now? 4 months, 5 months? It's hard to know. Oh, Devita, I think you're muted still.
I am. Thank you. I'm still, trying to get all the logistical maneuvers around Zoom. So thank you so much for letting me know I was muted. Yeah, I'll take that, and then let Ben continue the thread. Again, I think that the crisis, right, unveiled so much of what we already knew about the restaurant industry. At least I'm speaking from my perspective here in Detroit for FoodLab. And I'm taking notes as Ben is talking to kind of draw this connective tissue around some of the things that's happening in Philly and some of the things that are happening here in Detroit. But I think the thing that rises to the top, Molly, in regards to your question about how I'm thinking about restaurants differently in response to this crisis, is collaboration, right? Ben talked about how there's a collaboration of chefs and organizers that are in the gardens, and how they're giving out free food and taking care of their community. And so the way that I'm thinking about restaurants and the restaurant industry differently is, I think that for me, I have been going back to re-examine what the word restaurant really means. It comes from the Latin word of restore. So what does it now mean for a restaurant to restore? Restore hope, restore community, restore conviviality. What does it mean to nourish? Not just fancy food on a plate, but what does it mean to nourish your community? What does food for the soul actually mean? And so, these are challenging times in our community. And the restaurant industry in Detroit and Philadelphia and all over the world, really, but particularly here in the United States of America, has been really hit hard. And what gives me hope as I begin to think about the power of the restaurant industry is that a couple of things. Number one, chefs are starting to change their business models, and they're changing their business models to preserve employment of their staff, right? I know in Michigan, one of the things that our governor issued was that all in-house dining had to close, and they were only able to do curbside and takeout and delivery, right? What does that mean that on a drop of a dime to change your entire business model so you can keep your staff employed and also be in compliance with the legal ramifications of your state? Ben mentioned the community kitchen model that was inspired by Jose Andres and World Kitchen. So that changing of business models. I think the second thing that inspires me in the quest for chefs to save their restaurants have been them quickly putting their bodies and also their skills on the front lines to feed their community. So this whole concept of chefs as frontline workers, chefs as caregivers, taking care of their communities. And then I think the last thing that has really inspired me and had me thinking differently about restaurants, particularly independently owned mom and pop restaurants, because we are so dispersed all over the country and there's really no unifying body that really holds these businesses. But man, oh man, Molly and Ben, did I ever see chefs coming together in the midst of this pandemic to come together all over the country in their states and form these kind of independent restaurant coalitions to lobby the government, to call Congress to bring relief to restaurants. And so you got chefs as activists, chefs as leaders, chefs as caregivers, chefs as restorers. So I'm just thinking about the various different roles the chefs and restaurateurs are playing right now in this country outside of the restaurant.
And Ben, I know that you've been playing a lot of those roles too. You want to talk a little bit about what's happening for you out there?
Devita, I appreciate your analysis so much, and how you are able to say all these things that I really have been thinking about as well. The thing that's been new for us and difficult, it's been so much adaptation. Every week, we don't know if we can move this way, if we can reform this way, and it's constant conversations and adaptation. And I think that's really creativity, you know. And as we're you know, thinking about how are we using creativity? How are we awarding creative chefs and things like that? And we look at, you know, how is the creativity being used? Is it used, you know, in the plating or you know, they call the, you know, some of the most creative chefs in the world at places that have 20 or 30 people that's working for free as interns. But, you know, really like to be creative and to do some things for the community is a different way. It's a different set of aesthetics that is what is trying to use the creativity for. You know, and I think, you know, I'm just going to speak to the other side a little bit than what Devita was saying, because, you know, I also feel like chefs are also showing them true selves in some kind of ways, and not always in a positive way. You know, I see, you know, a good amount of the lobbying kind of to protect their own pockets. You know, I stood up with Councilmember Brooks, who was trying to pass or trying to pass through committee a bill for paid sick leave. And there were 25 well-known restaurateurs in Philadelphia that were against the paid sick leave. The bill wound up passing through committee, but I did see a lot of like organizing for self, you know, and also have yet to see, you know, the big independent restaurant coalition to mention undocumented workers. As we're reimagining the restaurant industry, you know, these people can't be left behind and overlooked as they have been throughout the history of the restaurant industry. Folks are working in farms in California that under, you know, with COVID, with forest fires and with heat wave and now more than ever, it's time for chefs to step up and lobby for these things too. So, you know, I'm happy to see the chefs, you know, getting involved in things, you know, and I'm still, you know, critical of the efforts to come. And I hope that, you know, the leaders that can emerge from this, you know, can take us into the right direction.
I'd like to go a little bit deeper on that one piece because you both brought it up in different ways. Thinking about how COVID has exposed, especially how restaurant workers are treated, and how we care for the people that are employed in restaurants, and what a model would look like that supports restaurant workers. And I wonder if you have seen anything either pre-COVID, and Devita, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the fellow program, or something that's happened now where that makes you think there's an opportunity to take something inspiring that can improve the treatment of restaurant workers, that there are new models that can improve the treatment of restaurant workers, or thinking about further up the supply chain, like Ben was mentioning, where the food comes from and how it's grown and who's growing it. So I'm curious if either of you have some inspiration there.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Ben. I'm being a little optimistic, but I've got my eye on folks who are showing themselves. To your point, Ben, and I'm not at all surprised. You know, Ben, you know, you and I, and I guess, you know, being in political organizing and doing this work and coming from this tradition of kind of Black prophetic organizing and leadership, and you know, I know, Ben, that just as hard as you and I and other people who are not like-minded, but other people like us who are heart-minded, who are really trying to transform the industry, Ben, there are thousands of more folks that are on the other side of the aisle wanting things to go back to normal, wanting us to return back to normal. What is that? Like, what does that mean, right? Because we know that normal was exploitive, normal was oppressive, normal meant that capital flowed to a very few. In many cases, it was cisgendered, very well-resourced, very well-connected white chefs, white restaurateurs, and white investors, and that people who were the backbones of the industry, Black and brown folks, indigenous folks, folks in the LGBTQI community, were being left behind, right? And so, Molly, that was a very interesting question in terms of what are the strategies, what are the tactics, how do we actually execute transformation and change, and what does that look like? And here's the reality, you know, independent restaurants all over the country who want to do the right thing, Molly, who want to center our workers, who want to pay them well, there's no way in the world that we could do it by ourselves. Without a much bigger, wider social safety net in this country, good policies in this country, individual restaurants, I hate to say it, will be a drop in the bucket. They really will. Like, we have to understand that, you know, independent restaurateurs, the challenges to ensure that workers are cared for, the challenges to ensure that workers have paid time off or sick leave, or by gosh, medical or health insurance. Why isn't that? Why isn't the government partnering? They talk about how small businesses are the backbones of this country and how many employees are employed through small businesses. Where's the support to ensure that we are partnering with our federal government to ensure that there is this support? Because to be quite honest, without massive legislation change, it's going to be really tough, and I'm just being honest. However, there are some silver linings for me, right? There are some glimmers of hope, right? And so I would think the silver lining in this pandemic for me is that more and more people are learning the power of things like mutual aid and community efforts. I think that people are supporting each other more than ever in this industry. And I think what's really interesting for me right now is consumers are starting to get engaged. Listen, you know, I have been and come from a family of community organizers, and never in my life, and I'm almost 51 years old, and never in my life have I seen people take to the streets to demand, you know, an equitable, fair restaurant industry. People are not marching for sustainable dining, right? But the fact of the matter is that we have to do a really great job of connecting what ethical and sustainable dining looks like, and we connect it to larger movements that are happening, right? And so, Molly, when you talk about like, how do we think about the supply chain? You know, there should be no reason why the restaurant industry isn't connected to the climate justice industry. Because there's one thing that we know in Detroit, particularly from our urban farmers, is that one thing that we could do to build a more sustainable supply chain in the food industry is stop factory farming. I'm talking about eradicate it, shut it down. Like, what does it look like to actually have legislation that supports small independent farmers who are at the heart, and that for me, that's at the heart of ethical dining. It's humane for the environment, for people, and for animals. So we really have to think about the entire ecosystem when we talk about transforming this food system. And for me, who comes from the city of Detroit, where we have 1,600 community and market farms. For me, who comes from the legacy of African Americans whose bodies, whose blood, whose labor built this agricultural movement in this country through slavery, it's like it starts with the seed, it starts with the land. So I can't even think about transformation without thinking about starting with the farmers first.
Absolutely. And I think the one with the most cultural power and the biggest platform that's connected to the farms and connected to the whole food system are these chefs. And so the spotlight is on them. And, you know, people who have been doing the work can kind of speak from their experience. But it's not something that you can really, you know, just create, you know, so quickly, because a lot of it is relationship based and education based. So I feel like the project that we've got going on here could never be happening without, you know, a whole lot of people that's collaborating with us and bringing their ideas together. And I think that it's definitely on the chef to look at these systems and systems that have been benefiting themselves, and to see that it's not a sustainable system, and it's that it's leaving people out and it's exploiting people, and you know, and to take that step to possibly alienate some of their wealthy customers or some of their, you know, hardlining, you know, conservative customers, and say, you know, that they're, you know, that this is the system that they want. And, you know, with the pandemic and now things are shifting, you know, the elites are not getting the top of the food chain at this point anymore. And so, you know, the chefs need to take that power. And, you know, food media for too long has just been a neutral platform that's apolitical. In the last few years, we've seen a little bit more of chefs that's, you know, co-opting this space to speak about some issues that are close to their heart, and political issues. And I think more of that needs to be done. You know, we need to talk about these things in the underbelly, the things that's under the bandage. And some people really need to lose their position of power. Things need to shift. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, I agree. And if I can draw the connection, because in this country, land is so critical. It is so important. And as I begin to think about the importance of farming and the ability to have access, to land as an African American, I, of course, can't help but to think about how, in this country, Black farmers have lost so much of their land because they were removed, um, um, taken from, land was stolen. And it's not just African Americans. Of course, I want to give homage to our First Nations people who, of course, were eradicated in many cases, and the loss of life and loss of land as well. So land is so important. And I would be remiss if I really didn't talk about not only land from the context of farmers, but land from the concept of real estate. In our industry, in the restaurant industry, you can't separate restaurants from real estate. And so living in a city like Detroit, you not only can't talk about restaurants and real estate without talking about how many cases restaurants were weaponized as a harbinger for gentrification in many Black and brown communities. So we can't, not have a conversation about land from the real estate perspective as well. And how in many cases, restaurants were a cornerstone to master plans and remodeling and revitalizing and gentrifying communities with your whole food markets or your farm to table restaurants or your artisan and handcrafted and artisanal kind of coffee shops. And I'm not trying to blame the chefs or the baristas or the restaurateurs, but it's so important that they understand that they are part of a larger kind of plan. And so, it upsets me so much that when some of these, chefs move into these communities, is that they don't look to become a part of the community at all. And so what is the role then of chefs when they move into Black and brown communities? What is their role in terms of making sure that their menu is accessible, hiring people in their neighborhood, reaching out to their communities instead of wanting to live in the city, but build a suburb in the city? What does it mean to be in the city, but you instead want to build a gated community in the sky? And all of these things, restaurants are so connected to the fabric of so many other ecosystems that we have to think large and broad when we start talking about transformation.
Yeah, there's so many vacant lots here in Philadelphia and so difficult to get access to them. The place where we're growing vegetables now is in Point Breeze, which is a place that's just in the combat zone of gentrification. And an interesting thing, specifically in Philadelphia, there's a city councilman named Alan Dom who is the recipient of 10% of the city's tax abatements. The tax abatement is for developers that spend X amount of money. They don't have to pay taxes for 10 years. Meanwhile, the public schools don't have the funding it needs. The library don't have the funding it needs. And this councilman also happens to be an investor in the largest restaurant group in the city. So these things are really deeply intertwined. In our city, and it's a battle. But so much more can be done with the vacant land here. There's so much opportunity to grow food around here, and we can do it as well.
I want to, I'm getting a couple of questions about how this kind of supply chain might work, and I want to get to that in a second. But first, Ben, there was a follow-up question that somebody asked. You said something about elites having less access to the top of the food chain than they once did as a result of COVID. Do you want to explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
What I meant was that restaurants are, a lot of restaurants go into the business with an ideal customer in mind. And that ideal customer might be the food critic of that city, or it might be some wealthy patron that's going to come and they can impress. And so they're thinking, how is my restaurant going to impress this person when they walk in the door? And I think at this point, restaurants are trying to survive, and they're trying to get their food out to people. So their food is becoming more accessible. And in the same token, it's not being so much catered to the elites, because there aren't these kind of elite dining spaces that are available, at least in the past 6 months, which has, also been, what's considered the superior food and aesthetic. So we're getting to see things the way they are.
Right, everyone's doing takeout now, and if you have those fantastic spaces, you can't go to them anyways. So less of that catering to the top isn't as effective.
It's more of a level playing field. I appreciate that.
There's a question, and Devita looks like she might be frozen for a second. So, oh, she's back. Okay, good.
Yeah,
okay.
No, I'm sorry. There was a question about factory farm workers. I thought came up on the chat.
Yes, there is, and so I wanted to put that back to you. Elizabeth says, I 100% agree with you on industrial farming, would love to see it eradicated. However, I also worry about workers employed and folks who rely on less expensive food. How do we build up support if we truly eradicated factory farms, so the folks who can't afford more expensive meat and folks who rely on these larger industry jobs wouldn't be left behind? So it's a question about workers, and it's a question about food supply for those who are earning the least.
Yeah, and it's a question about poverty. It's a question about affordability. It's a question about, do we really value, or do we even know what the true cost of food is? And so when we start talking about how much food costs and how people are reliant on least expensive food, why is it less expensive? What food is subsidized in this country and what food is not? Why is it that processed food is so cheap and people can afford to buy it, but fresh, healthy food that is culturally appropriate and nutrient dense is so expensive? And so that question, it wraps up a lot of various different systems. But one of the things, and the reason why I'm going to put my glasses on here, again, this is my 50-year-old eyes, is because that's such a brilliant, thoughtful question. And I hope that someone behind the scenes that I know that's running tech for us can put this in the chat, because I think this is a great article that I want folks who are listening to us to read. And the article is in this online magazine that I love. It's called The Bitter Southerner. And the name of it is called My Family Pays the Price for America's Chicken Dinner. And what I love is just this quick couple of sentences here. It says, 2 of my elderly aunts and 1 of my cousins are still employed at the poultry plant back home in Mississippi. Swollen hands and pulsating varicose veins trails their tired limbs of older Black women like my aunt, who have worked in these plants for over 60 collective years. They are part of an invisible, devalued labor pool that is deeply affected economically, emotionally, and physically by a tainted history that has bled into today's meat and poultry processing industry. All of this to put chicken on your supper table. So my question to people when they talk about, what will we do without factory farming? What will we lose? People need to understand how these workers are treated at factory farming, and we have to reimagine what it looks like. And the thing is, y'all, we don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to the reimagination. There was a time in this country where we had a distributed network of smaller, independent family farms. There was a time in this country where chicken and meat processing did not lay in the hands of 4 companies. 4 companies. And so we have to really start to dig deep and start to unravel the way this industry is created. Somebody created it. So if human created it, humans can then uncreate it, right? So then the question then becomes like, how do we begin to dismantle? How do we begin to eradicate? How do we begin to enforce policies that break up these larger processing plants? And how can we revert back to these smaller distributed processing plants and smaller farms, right? And I think that's a great question, but I think that, I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is that when we start talking about eradicating factory farming and how do we make more food accessible, accessible, we can't have that conversation without talking about income inequality and wealth gap in this country, and we can't have this conversation without poverty. So it's a really deep and complex question, a brilliant question, yes, but I hope people's minds are starting to think about how all of these questions are interwoven into multiple systems in this country. But that's the beauty of food, Molly and Ben, right? Is because it is so connected to systems. You can't have a conversation without food without having a conversation about climate change. You can't have a conversation about food without having a conversation about our immigration policy. You can't have a conversation about food without having a conversation about anti-Sherman trust, right? These conversations are so complex. I'm glad folks are now starting to pay attention to what we are trying to dismantle and trying to transform.
And maybe that's one of the things that we can actually be grateful to COVID for, right? That people are actually thinking a little bit differently about their food. I want to kind of piggyback on that question with, and Devita and Ben, you both spoke to this a little bit before, but what I've heard people say, and folks have asked me this in my own life, that, you know, if we start treating and paying restaurant workers fairly, if we start paying the true cost of food, the labor cost, the environmental cost, then only high-end restaurants will survive and regular people can't afford them. And only a few jobs in the food supply chain will survive, and where are those people going to work? Is there truth to that? And I think that you already spoke to this a little bit more, but what do alternatives look like?
I think the alternatives have to be imagined. And a few days before the James Beard Award got canceled, someone called my attention to a post from a chef on the West Coast named David Kinch, and he was talking about why he was recusing himself from the awards that he had been nominated for Outstanding Chef. And, you know, I found the post really difficult because in the same post, you know, he's talking about how, you know, there's really nothing to be celebrating right now, and that the chefs need a reset, and, you know, vaguely talks about, you know, the lack of inclusivity in the restaurant, and in the same line, just saying how he's going to need to raise his prices across the board to be able to afford all these things. So how can you talk about inclusivity and raising your prices at the same time? You know, real inclusivity, I think would have to, you know, be reimagining some of these things that are considered, you know, the great, the best restaurants, the landmark dining, and, you know, to talk about like what really, like, how is the creativity best utilized?
So Molly, let's break that question down. There was a lot of questions in that one question. But I think the question really, at the heart of the question, it was about the survival of the industry, right? It was about the sustainability of restaurants, and will they be around? And then what will happen to the employees if we lose restaurants in the industry, right? And so let's be a little bit realistic in the sense that there were a lot of restaurants in this country, and I'm not here to judge them good, bad, or indifferent. There were a tremendous amount, and some people might even argue too many. That's not Devita saying that, but some people might say that. But I will say this from a Detroiter's perspective, that, you know, there was the word that I'm looking for, there was a trend that was happening in this country at one point, where every kind of city that was looking to do some sort of development or revitalization, they were looking to themselves, will their city be the next Portland? Will their city be the next Brooklyn? I don't know how many times, Molly and Ben, I've read articles in this mainstream media and food publications talking about Detroit is the next Brooklyn. Everybody was looking for their city to be the next hot food boom town, right? And again, when you start talking about using food as a development tool for developers, it left out the workers. And so when you start talking specifically about certain kinds of restaurants, particularly the business model of restaurants, and I'm specifically speaking about those restaurants that have a dine-in component that had servers. And maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but do people understand? And I think too many consumers do not understand the business model of restaurateurs and how employees are paid, especially if you have a front of the house staff that is paid through the subsidization of consumers. That means your tips are paying for your front of the house workers' salary. No place else on planet Earth, no other country on the earth has a system like the system in the United States of America, where front of the house workers and servers, their salary is subsidized by consumers. And not only the subsidization of what we call tip wage workers, right? People don't understand the externalities that go along with having tip wage workers. So there's a compelling case that we're having right now in this industry about what it looks like to eradicate tips, because it facilitates racism, sexism, wage theft, and then there's the disbursement between this chasm between front of the house and back of the house in pay. And so when we start talking about, where will folks work, right? If some of these restaurants close, some of these restaurants will close. They will close, right? And that's, again, another question that we need to ask ourselves, because coming from someone who's a Detroiter, right? Coming from someone who's a Detroiter, whose city literally put the world on wheels through automobile manufacturing. And this is the way I'm thinking about this, y'all. I'm thinking about, I've seen this in my lifetime. I've seen a city that was reliant on automobile workers to make cars. What do you think happened to all of those automobile workers when we introduced mass manufacturing? And we introduced not only globalization, but we introduced automation. What do you think happened to all of those automobile workers? What do you think is going to happen to technology and how it's going to be something that is also going to decimate our industry as well? We're already seeing technology at play in the restaurant industry. You're right, that's a great question to ask. What is going to happen to restaurant workers if restaurants close? Again, policy. Is this now a time for us to be talking about universal basic income? Is this a time for us to be having conversations about education? Maybe we have so many restaurant workers who are working in restaurants because they can't afford to go off into higher education and to get college degrees that they can better themselves and I'm not trying to say better themselves and leave the industry, right? Because I think that there's growth, I think there's opportunity, I think there's an opportunity for development within the industry, right? I do believe that. But now we need to have and if you really care about the livelihood of restaurant workers, then how do we equip them with the tools and the resources so that they have the ability to take agency over their lives, right? And they also have options. And so these are the kinds of things that, again, I'm thinking about. And I love this audience because y'all are thinking too. And so instead of posing these questions, I'm asking people to dig deep with me to start thinking about how we get the solution to some of these questions that y'all are asking. And you'll hear me time and time go back to policy. You'll hear me time and time go back to advocacy and organizing. You'll hear me go back to that.
I also love the cooperative model, and I think it's another way to imagine the future of restaurants, of how, every restaurant that I've ever worked, every restaurant worker, they contributed their creativity and their efficiency systems and better ways to do things and new ideas, and really brought 100% to the business. But at the end of the day, it's still run like an authoritarian government, where there's an owner and everyone has to kind of work to please the owner. And so the cooperative model, I think, presents something different. It's more based around communication, and it's a shared equity. I would love to see more restaurants experiment with that. I don't think there's there's a lot of places that are doing anything like that right now. But I think it's one good idea is exploring the cooperative thing. Yeah, Devita, you make a lot of great points about what happened to the workers in Detroit, in the automobile industry. You know, and doing this project here where we're creating free meals for people every day. We're also paying the cooks that are working in the kitchen, and you know, we are only able to make 200 meals a day, and it's opened my eyes to how much food insecurity there is in this city. And I think it's also a great business model. And we have our customers, we prepare our food for our customers with as much, you know, love and integrity and talent and technique as we would if they were paying customers. You know, our purveyors are being paid, and this is another business model, but the end result is that the meals are completely accessible and they're free. So, you know, these are, I think, two solutions which I think are creative ways that are giving people work, and also, you know, in the case of giving the free meals, you know, giving people work, and in the cooperative model, you know, giving people agency to have that kind of ground level power on the policy of the restaurant and how the place is run.
Yeah. You know, Molly, I just thought about something, again, going back to that question in terms of, you know, what will happen to the workers, you know, if restaurants close. And as I said before, many of them will. And so that question specifically asks, what will happen to restaurant workers when restaurants close? And, you know, that made me think about something. I was on a panel one time and someone asked me about, you know, what I would want from my city, you know, the city of Detroit. You know, Devita, if you could design a city, you could design Detroit in a way in which you thought it was fair and just and equitable, it was the city, how would you design it? And I simply said this much, coming from the perspective of someone who is a Gen Xer, coming from someone from the perspective that is a part of what we call the sandwich generation. So I don't have any children, but my brother has a baby. My niece, she's 4 years old. Her name is Aliyah. And then, so she is the first and probably only baby in the family. So she was born 4 years ago. But then, you know, my elderly parents, my mother is 78, my father's 80, and they are in their what we call sunset years. They're dying. They're not dying today or tomorrow, but eventually they are slowly, they're aging. And I simply answered the question that a city to me that is just and equitable and fair is a city that loves its children and respects its elders. And they have policy in place that really exemplifies their love of children and their respect for their elders. And when that question about what will happen to the food workers and the restaurants, I think about that statement I made. A city that loves its children and respects its elders. Imagine if we had a city that loved its children so much that they didn't feed them processed food in their schools, but they actually had restaurant workers, chefs and sous chefs and line cooks that were in our schools, in those kitchens, and in many cases, kitchens that have been shut down. In many cases, kitchens that only have microwaves in them, and they're microwaving Hot Pockets and microwaving pizza and feeding it to our babies who are supposed to be our future leaders of tomorrow. Imagine if we had restaurant workers who were actually feeding our babies healthy and nutritious food. Imagine in our nursing homes, in our care centers, the most vulnerable of our elders who were disproportionately affected as related to this coronavirus, because of their immune systems and because they were immunocompromised and they were weak and they could not fight against this virus. Imagine if we had cooks and chefs in our home care systems that were taking care of our elderly. Imagine if that was a part of our insurance policies, that an at-home care professional not only came to your house to take care of your your loved ones when they were sick, but it actually came with a chef who actually prepared their meals for them too. Like, we have to reimagine what this really looks like and what this means. And if you have to do that by centering people first, and if we're not doing that, we're not doing the work.
And so I think that you may have described it, and Devita, thank you for placing it back at the people who are most vulnerable, the people who we think of as the most vulnerable, right? Our children, our elders, but there are so many more people that are made vulnerable by this system, as you both have pointed out. And I'm wondering if you could wave a magic wand where Congress worked well and the Farm Bill was perfect, and and our cities were on their way towards realizing racial equity and equity across the food system for each of you in like 30 seconds or less. What is an anti-racist food system? What is an anti-racist restaurant scene? What does a just restaurant scene look like in Detroit? What does it look like in Philadelphia? Just imagine what it would be, and give me like your 30 seconds. This is what I see.
Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, it is a it's a deep it's a deep question, Molly. It really is. But for me, I think that it really starts with the acknowledgement of how Black and brown bodies particularly have been kind of marginalized, and the acknowledgement of our resiliency. And I love that question, Molly, because, you know, I think here in Detroit, particularly where I am, it's like we're trying to do that work, and it really starts with our children. So an anti-racist food system in Detroit, first and foremost, it looks like making sure that we're very clear on a language and a narrative of what we want. In Detroit, and I know some people use this terminology, but I want to be very clear with the people who are listening to this. In Detroit, we do not use the word food deserts. We do not use that word, right? Because that is a very inaccurate description of what is wrong, what the challenges are in our neighborhood. Our neighborhoods are not deserts. In the city of Detroit, as I indicated, we have over 1,600 community farms and gardens. And last year alone, in the city of Detroit, we grew close to 600,000 tons of fresh fruit and vegetables. Things grow in Detroit. And it's not a true depiction of our neighborhood. And the true depiction of our neighborhood is that many of our communities, they live under what we call food apartheid. Because what was done to the city of Detroit and marginalized communities occupied by Black and brown bodies was intentional, okay? I encourage people to read The Color of Law. Redlining, segregation, racial covenants, like these were all intentional. So an anti-racist food system to me looks like the ability for Black and brown bodies to live in a system, to work within a food system where we do not have policies that are placed upon us that takes away our agency, that takes away our ability to advocate for our rights. It looks like a system that allows for all people to have access to clean water, affordable food, safe streets and communities. And I love that this narrative language and writing is starting to come into place, and I see that in text that is being written. One of the books that I love too is Dr. Monica White wrote this book that's called Freedom Farmers. And I lift this up, Molly and Ben, because when we start talking about anti-racism, we have to start talking about what, again, that looks like. And it's so important for me, for our children to understand that when they see Black and brown bodies in the fields, that they don't associate that with with slavery or oppression or tenant farming or sharecropping, that they understand that farming for us means freedom. It means liberation. It means power. And for us to be able to kind of execute on that narrative and that language, that really means that Black and brown bodies truly need to be free in this country. And what does freedom and liberation look like? That means that they don't, with precision, right, try to oppress Black and brown bodies. And so that's what it looks like for us, is the ability for us to be sovereign, the ability for us to be and live and fight for freedom and liberation.
That was so well said. I don't have really other thing to add to that. I'm glad that you dropped a couple book recommendations so that I can so that we can everybody in the Color of Law and the Freedom Farmers. I'm glad you gave some book recommendations. And as far as just another thought of it, you know, just about gatekeepers in the restaurant industry, and I think that we're in the position that we're in some kind of way also just because of the nepotism and in the kind of subtle racism on who's getting highlighted and what businesses are being written about, and how, you know, that narrative has to also change and be more dispersed around all different kind of communities. And in order to do that, you know, you can't just have a very monolithic perspective coming from the critic. You know, we need critics that can go into different neighborhoods and actually understand the aesthetics and the nuance of different cultures, which are not only Western. And so, I mean, that was the only other point that I had. But I think, you know, Devita really spoke on the bigger picture of acknowledging this, the contributions of Black and brown people, and also the systemic racism that's pitted against them. And that's where we have to start.
And Ben, I love that you, because again, the infrastructure and ecosystem is so big, and I love that you talked about the anti-racism that needs to be, you know, dismantled in food system across the board, whether that's mainstream media, whether that's in the environment of restaurateurs and gatekeepers. But can I also add this, that there's so much work that is happening on a grassroots level and in community, Molly and Ben, that is trying to undo this racist food system, and it is a shame. It is almost embarrassing to some point, and it angers people that are on the ground that so much of this good work, when it's led by Black and brown people, and can I be very specific when I say this, Black women, is overlooked, and particularly organizations that are dependent upon, well, I shouldn't say I'm gonna use the word dependent on, organizations that are dependent upon, and a large part of their budget, right, is tied to philanthropy. And so when we start talking about this ecosystem, we can't not even think about how do we transform it and make it anti-racist if we aren't centering people who are deeply and most impacted by the racist food system, if we continue to fund white-led organizations, because they don't have the same lens. They don't have the same point of view. But if you continue, even for the philanthropy, to continue to fund organizations disproportionately that are not led by people of color, and value their lived experiences and seek those people out, not just the people who you have connections with or you're friends with or people who you know in the industry that all of a sudden, you know, wanted to start a nonprofit organization, but we need to make sure that the people that are doing the work on the ground, that they are supported and their organizations are funded to the same amount that white-led organizations are funded as well. So I just wanted to put that in, because our ecosystem, in order for transformation to happen, we have to look at our ecosystem across the board, primarily where money is flowing and where it's not.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's like, I don't know if it's a fear of people that's going to do something differently than as, you know, maybe the white person would imagine to do it. But, you know, that's that's totally important.
Yeah. I would also encourage folks. I absolutely love it. This is another kind of resource drop. It just dropped today at like 1 o'clock this afternoon, and I have been like digging deep in it because it is absolutely brilliant, and I am in love with it, and I'm so excited. So Eater just dropped their national package that's called Now What. Right? And Now What is them actually taking a crystal ball and looking into the future of the restaurant industry. It is a beautiful package. It has some brilliant writers. I do have to say, I helped, I contributed my voice to a few of the articles in it, but it is absolutely brilliant. Oh, good. Somebody put it up in the chat. Thank y'all so much for that. And it's absolutely brilliant. And so as you all are having these conversations through this kind of digital dialogue, I encourage people to kind of look at some of the brilliant writing that's being done about how folks are already reimagining and thinking about what the future of restaurants looks like.
And Devita, I'm glad that you dropped that piece that you're involved in, and thank you. I know what I'm doing tomorrow morning now. Don't tell my boss, because I'm going to be doing a lot of digging, but I think it's all really relevant. And Ben, just so you know, in the chat, a couple of people have already posted about an event that 215 People's Alliance is having tomorrow on Zoom. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so we've had over 200 people request to be engaged with the work that we're doing somehow over here. And so it got to the point where it's more than we can handle on an individual basis. So we're having a big orientation meeting with all the people who want to get involved in this project, either doing the political organizing part or the fundraising part or the gardening part or the working in the kitchen. And so we're having a big meeting, and then we're going to have breakout rooms and talk about different pieces. And really what we're really trying to build over here, I think, is a pilot program, is a model that we can that many can happen in many different neighborhoods all over the city, where restaurants can be transformed into real community kitchens that are also tied with political organizing. Setting the precedent was the Black Panther Party and the free breakfast program, where they were, we want to influence this election in November. We want to give food to people and connect them with resources and information that's going to help to unravel some of the systemic injustices that things are in the places the way that they are. Free food is a good way to get the conversation started about food insecurity and the bigger issues that come from that. So the meeting tomorrow is open, and people can register through our social media. We have a website up, 215pa.com.
Ben, I love that so much. And if I can just drop another, Molly, I'm gonna have you reading all week. I'm just gonna just have y'all.
I appreciate that, Devita. Thank you.
Just dig down, read it. And so Ben, I absolutely love that. I have been spending a lot of time doing a couple of things. I mean, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the past and the present to help inform the future. I do believe our ancestors left us a blueprint for us to follow. I truly believe that. And so, Ben, I love the fact that you mentioned the Black Panther Party and this whole connection between food and political action and organizing, again, is very much so rooted in Black tradition. And a really good friend of mine, her name is Jocelyn Jackson, whose mother happened to be a member of the Black Panther Party. She wrote a great article in Eater. It's called, "If You Want to Experience Liberation, Black Women Must Be at the Table." From the Montgomery boycott to the Black Lives Matter movement, Black women have made food a central part of protest and movement building. Again, Ben, I can't stress enough how food is the cornerstone for so much because it touches everybody in our society. I wish I could come to that meeting that you all are having because I think it's so very important of how we use food at this moment to build community.
We would, at some point, we would love to have you speak to our cohorts. that would be amazing. I want to speak something about the NRA because I've seen a couple questions in there about it.
And we'll just make sure that we know that this is the National Restaurant Association, not the other NRA, in case folks get confused. Yes.
Right.
Sorry, Ben, keep going.
Yeah, the National Restaurant Association, you know, lobbies for a lot of the big franchises. They lobby against eliminating the sub-minimum tip wage. They lobby for a lot of, you know, anti-worker policies and how could that be reimagined. I don't know if that change is going to come within that organization, but, you know, the only way that I feel like maybe another organization that's just more powerful that can overtake that can, you know, that's more worker centered and more equitable centered. I don't know if the National Restaurant Association can be reformed. I mean, I feel like they're kind of created for a certain reason, you know, to lobby for owners, and, you know, in that case, like big owners with a lot of money, you know, and I guess it's the capitalistic view of, you know, the bottom line is the most important thing. You know, that has to be left behind. I don't think that's the wisest way to go, and, you know, it's certainly not the most sustainable. It seems to be also kind of selfish, and so I don't know why, you know, these kind of modes of practice are just so easily accepted as a status quo when, you know, with a little bit of analysis we can just realize that they're not good. And so, I mean, changing the thinking and actually having the courage to change the course, you know, we all have to do that. I mean, if this all is not enough wake up call, I don't know what else can be, but we have to change our course.
And I think on that call to change our course, we should leave it there, because I think that if there's one thing I've heard from both of you again and again, it is let's try to, like, we have to imagine differently. And it's going to be a wholesale change of many different systems in order to reimagine restaurants. And I want to thank you both for bringing your wisdom and your passion to the conversation today. And there are a couple of questions in the chat that we didn't get to. Devita and Ben, if it's okay, I'll send them to you. And if you have ideas about responses, we can share that back with the participants whose emails we have, so we can share that back as well. And thank you for your time, and thank you for everybody who attended. And Susanna, thank you for managing the chat and the technology. If you would like to join the next conversation, it is at this same time in 2 weeks, the 15th of September, where we're going to be talking about entrepreneurs and how they have pivoted their food businesses. We heard a little bit about how some food businesses in Philadelphia and in Detroit are doing that, but we're going to get a little bit deeper on that topic in 2 weeks. So thank you for being here. Devita, thank you. Ben, thank you. I appreciate both of you as individuals, and in a future world, we'll all get to have dinner sometime. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Ben,
It's a pleasure, honor to be here.
thanks, Ben. Ben, give Christina my love.
Okay, I will.
Okay, I'll talk to you guys soon.
Great to hear you.
Okay, great.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.